Now my question for you, now it's 19 minutes after, and my question for you is this. Are you hungering for God, or are you just floating through life like everybody else? When I was young, not only did my father come here to Camp Barica, but we went to Lake Lansing Baptist Church in Lansing, Michigan. And our church, Lake Lansing Baptist, every year went on the family canoe trip. And what we all did is we met at the church. It was a small church, about 80 people. And we all got on the church bus and we went up to this canoe place. I don't remember where it was. And we got off at the canoe place, and the canoe place put us in another old bus, and it was pulling a trailer with old canoes in it, and it chugged us up the river, and they gave everybody a canoe, put people in the canoe. A lot of us didn't even get paddles. You don't even need a paddle on a canoe trip. It's because the river is flowing back to the canoe place. And so they put you in upstream, and you got in your boat or your canoe, and I remember I hardly stayed in the canoe. I was out splashing everybody. We were trying to tip everybody over, but the canoes just kept going all day long, and by about 5 o'clock, there we were back at the bus, back at the canoe place. The current carried us. Do you know what the Bible says in Matthew? Jesus said in Matthew 7 that we are all born into a river, and it's flowing away from God. It's flowing toward destruction. It's called the broad way. It's the wide way. It's the way that everyone is going. When we're born facing away from God, and we spend our life floating further away from Him. And when we got saved, the Lord turned us around, gave us a paddle, and said, that's the way you're supposed to be going, toward the narrow way, the straight way, difficult way. And you are supposed to be resisting the world. You've heard all these terms. Resisting the world, the flesh, the devil, the ways that are against God. We go against that toward the celestial city in heaven and Christ, whose arms are open. Do you know what happens when you're going through life like that? I was in a Christian home, but I was going the wrong way, and the Lord turned my little canoe around, and I went to school after that, and from that time on, we're going to public school all the way through Michigan State University and everything that I've gone through. Everywhere I went, my teachers and my classmates were telling me, your canoe is pointing the wrong way. People tried to turn me around. They go, you're going the wrong way. We're all doing this. Like my son just started at University of California. Do you know what his first class was about? Sexual freedom, lesbianism, and gay rights. That's English class. That's what you're writing your papers on nowadays. Defending the rights to be godless. Did you know people have the right to be godless, but they will pay for that right forever? But they will try and turn your canoe around because they don't like you heading differently than them. So my question for you is, are you floating downstream, or are you resisting the culture? How do you know if you're resisting the culture? By the hunger for God. Do you, in fact, now it's 21 after. I know all of you are nervous about your kids. I could go all night, but I'm counting the minutes, and I will be done in a moment. Did you know there are only 3 settings in this room this morning or this evening? If you're born again and have a hunger for God, you're healthy. If you don't have a hunger for God, then you're sick or you've never been saved. See, there's only 3 states. Lost, saved with a hunger for God, or sick. That means you were saved, but you are not presently operating with a hunger for God. And that's where Jesus said, I ask you to either be cold or hot, not to be lukewarm, not to just be floating through life. You're saved, you got your fire insurance, you're going. I want you to either be hot or cold. Now you say, wait a minute, he wants us to be negative? No. Hot, zealous, cold, refreshing. Both of those things in Laodicea were positive. Cold water's good, hot water's good. Tepid water is not good. Stagnant water is bad. You see, Jesus said, if you're healthy, you'll be hungering for me. You will be like a newborn babe. You will be, Hebrews 5, growing and learning. But you know what? Some of those churches in Revelation, he said, you're dead. You don't even know me. You don't have any spiritual hunger. Now let me ask you this. When babies are born, if a baby's in the hospital Now, I'm sure we have medical personnel here. If a baby's in the hospital and has no appetite, they are very concerned about that child. Yet we have churches in Michigan filled with spiritual newborns that for years have no hunger for God. You know what we do? We just keep the programs going. And we don't let anybody get too close. We don't let anybody feel bad. You don't want to make it negative. I just got a note from one of our students from Calvary in Kalamazoo that went to Central Michigan. He's on an athletic team. And he said he went to the Christian group that meets at that school. And he went to the Christian group and he said that there was no mention of the gospel. There was no mention of sin. And he went up to the leader afterward and he said, "This is our opening meeting. Why don't you say that?" And he said, "We didn't want to scare everybody away. If we talk about sin and judgment, the kids won't come." And so we just entertain them. And I thought, can you imagine if the neonatal ward of the hospital had these failure to thrive babies and they weren't alarmed that they weren't eating? How is your hunger for God today? In the Old Testament, biblical fasting, learning this lifestyle of denying, was an urgent call to get serious about knowing God. In the New Testament, we're going to look at this week, biblical fasting was an ancient spiritual discipline that rescheduled my life with God at the center. That's what I mean about going back to the original settings. When you and I were saved, God was at the center of our life. Everything in our life revolved around Him at salvation. And we've just messed it up after that. And we need to reset. And what do we put in the center of our lives? Dining and relaxing and amusing and accumulating and advancing in our career and securing our finances and a multitude of other things that are not wrong. There's nothing wrong with any of those things unless they take God's place. They're very deadly to intimacy with God. In the early church, in the book of Acts, biblical fasting shaped their lives. You read the book of Acts, they fasted and prayed before everything. In the early church, a hunger for God was a powerful way to yield every part of their life to the Lord. So, here's a conclusion, and this is 925. Biblical fasting is an immediate way to declare your allegiance to God's way and God's glory every day of your life. So, this week we're going on a journey, this weekend. God's way in His Word is the only way to live in a disintegrating culture. Hungering for God is the original setting. 1 Peter 2, verse 2. As newborn babies, desire the pure milk of the Word. Now you say, how do you get that desire? You ask for it. Did you know I have a smartphone that's much smarter than I am, but I have young people, children, my own children, and I will mess this thing so much. Sometimes it gets so big that only one icon fills the whole screen. I go, "Will you fix this?" And they go, "Oh, it's 3 fingers." Boom. You ever done that? It goes right small again. And I went, "How did you know that?" And they said, "Come on, Dad, we'll show you everything you need to know on this thing." I had to tell them, I need help. You know what this Labor Day weekend is all about? You came here to get alone with your family, to enjoy them, but also to get alone with God, and to take your life and say, it's not, the icons are too big, God. Will you touch my life? And do you know what can happen this week? God can go and reset my life, your life. He wants to put us back in the original settings that He designed for us. And that's a life of prayer, seeking Him, fasting, denying ourselves, and resting. That's trusting Him and His plans for us. And that's our study of hungering for God.